Guys, this is Ms. Nickerson. I'm going over real quick the bubble lab in class in case you missed it or you want to try to get on again on your home. You were sent home some lab kit supplies with a couple straws, some yarn, and some thread, okay? You're probably going to need a pair of scissors, and then if possible, if you have another straw, I should have packed one more. I just made a mistake. So maybe dig around, see if you can find a Slurpee straw or something. It's going to really help do this lab if you have one more straw. So the first thing we need to do is we need to assemble our frame. So you're going to take your two straws, kind of eyeball it, cut them in half for me, please. Okay, so now we have four that are roughly the same size. We're going to take our yarn. I'm going to kind of blunt off the edge, make it a little bit easier. And we're going to thread these kind of like we're threading beads onto string. Okay, so I'm going to thread 1, 2. I'm going to pause it for a second and I'll finish threading so you can see, don't have to watch me. Okay, so I've got my 4 pieces of straw onto my string here, my yarn. So now I'm going to tie that. It's kind of tight right there. Create a quick little knot to hold these together. And we're creating ourselves a frame, okay? I'm going to choose to cut off the extra here, so I just don't have to mess with this extra yarn, but it wouldn't really matter if you cut it off or not. Okay, so there's my frame. It's all created and it's flexible. Okay, and that's what we're going to be using today, right? We're also got our string, and we're going to cut a short section off of the thread here, maybe about, I don't know, 6-7 inches. Okay, and we're going to need to tie it together to make ourselves a little loop. I'm going to tie it around 2 fingers. Some people have better thread tying skills than others. Someday I have good skills, some days I don't. But I'm going to just tie myself a little tiny loop here so that we have a little circle. We're going to need that for our lab as well. There it is. Tighten it up. So there is just a little loop that I created with the string. Again, I'm going to just trim off the edges. Makes it a little easier to do with. Okay, so these are the 2 things that we need to assemble: our frame and a little tiny loop. Hang on to this thread. You will use the rest of the thread in the lab, but we can set it to the side for right now. Okay, so next up is we're going to need to create some type of bubble solution. You could use a thin tray that maybe you have at home, like a baking tray or something. A plate would even work. I also like an old dish pan or something would work good. So we have lab trays at school, but don't feel like it has to be a tray. It really only needs to have like 1/8 of an inch of water in it to make this work. I've made myself a bubble solution of just some water and some dish soap. If you want to make it like an amazing bubble solution, you can add a little tiny bit of cornstarch in there, but it's not really required for this to work. And I'm not using like gobs and gobs of soap. It's just, about a tablespoon of dish soap works. Also, shampoo would work. Anything that's like a liquidy, thick soap works pretty well. Even laundry detergent works pretty well. Okay, I'm going to put my frame in. Make sure it's really, really wet. Okay. And at this time, I've opened up the lab document that goes with this particular lab. And you'll see on that screen that it has, actually, I think I can show you real quick here. Bring it back to my webcam here and share my screen. And I'll bring up that document real fast so we can kind of talk through the answers real fast. So there is the bubble lab. And there's that student sheet. So it has 6 questions of the 6 concepts that we're going to be learning about and modeling with our bubbles. The first is membranes are fluid and flexible. Then they can self-repair. They have membrane-bound organelles inside of them. There are proteins that float around inside the membranes, gap junctions, and binary fission, how some cells reproduce, okay? So for each of these concepts, as I demonstrate them in the lab, you're going to write as you understand it in your own words, how our model represents the real thing. So what you saw and what it means to be fluid in a flexible membrane, okay? So I'll go back to my document camera so you can see the lab, but that's what you're going to be filling out as we do the lab, okay? So my frame has been sitting in here for a little while. It's the yarn is nice and soaked, so it's really good. So let's talk about the very first concept that we want to take a look at with our model, and that is that membranes are fluid and flexible. So as I pull this model up out of the tray, I can create a bubble inside of the frame. You can kind of see the shine of that bubble, all right? However I move my frame, that bubble is staying in there, all right? They are not static. Cell membranes are flexible, they bend, and they adapt to changing conditions. My favorite things to do with this one is to cause it to have quite a bit of bend. I can move it up and down, which is kind of hard to see in this video, so I'm gonna do it side to side so you can see it moving here. You can see that bubble flexing back and forth, kind of like a trampoline, okay? So very flexible, not static, and they bend in order to adapt to their changing conditions, just like the cell membrane on a cell does. Okay, so that's our first concept. Our second concept is that membranes self-repair. So if we have something that goes through the cell membrane, okay, like my finger here, oops, I popped it by accident. You gotta get your finger wet, sorry, okay? When I pull my finger out of this, it's gonna self-repair. Okay, those lipids are going to heal back up together, and there's not like a hole left there. Membranes and cells do that similar. Those phospholipids move across the fluid mosaic model, and they can self-repair when we have a hole. They move against one another, okay? This helps them repair small breaks in the bilayer, and it makes it so that it helps them adjust molecules that are going to be moving in and out of the cell. That's our second concept. Membranes can self-repair. Our third one require us to move over the bucket real quick and use a solid surface. I need to pause for a second because I have somebody coming in on my Zoom call. So hang on a second. I'm going to pause and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I had a piece of wood underneath my document camera here, and that's not going to really work. I need like a slick surface. So if you're working on a kitchen table or a kitchen counter, it would work great. Okay, so I've got like an old plastic binder here that I've got kind of a smooth, slick surface. For this next one, I'm going to take a little bit of my bubble fluid. I'm going to put it on there, move it around a little bit. It does not take a lot. I'm just making a thin surface here to put a bubble on. Okay. And I'm going to take that extra straw that hopefully you were able to find. It doesn't really matter what kind of straw it is. I'm going to dip it into my bubble solution, and I'm going to create a membrane here. Okay, so this bubble sitting on top of my folder here represents the membrane of a cell. But besides the cell membrane, the organelles inside the cells also are membrane bound. So I could take my straw back in, and I could create, for example, the membrane of the nucleus, the nuclear membrane, okay? Or maybe over here, oops, I popped one. Right next to it, maybe we have the membrane of the mitochondria. And then over here, we have the membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum, okay? So even the membrane of the cell itself, the organelles within the cell, also have their own membranes. So the organelles are also membrane bound. That is our third concept, okay? If you want to, you can kind of see how many you can fit in there. The most I've ever seen for people layering in here is 6. So that's not really having anything to do with cells, but it's kind of interesting to see how it all comes together, okay? That was our third concept. This is true in eukaryotic cells for that third concept, that eukaryotic cells have membranes on the organelles, and they have a phospholipid bilayer just like the ones that are on the outside plasma membrane of the cell, okay? All right, our fourth concept, this is actually my favorite one, but it's a little tricky. And this one might be one best done with 2 people, okay? Kobe, could you come help me real fast again? You know what you're doing here. All right, so here's what we're gonna do on this one. We're going to model how the cell membrane also has proteins in it, and those proteins can allow large molecules to go through. So I've got a second helper here. He's going to pull our cell membrane up, and I'm going to bring that loop that I made earlier. I'm going to get that loop wet, okay? He's going to lift it up out of the thing here. I'm going to drop my loop onto the cell membrane here, and then I'm going to use something dry to pop it. If I can get it popped. Yeah, come on, pop. Ah, popped. All right, did you see how I just snapped to that circle? All right, that is actually a hole. That's a hole in the cell membrane, but you can see we still have the bubble sheet here, just not right there. This represents a protein. There are proteins inside of the cell membrane. Oop, we popped it. That's okay. Do it again for me. Inside of the cell membrane that allow large and charged molecules to come inside of the cell. Oops. Come on. Here, one more time, Cubes. Thank you. Pull it up higher. There you go. Let's see. Let me pop it. Ready? Watch it snap. Ready? Snap. Okay, so there's our protein that large molecules could go in and out of the cell, or charged molecules could go in and out of the cell. These proteins are fluid also. They're going to move around the cell membrane in that mosaic model, okay? But that's my favorite one because it pops and you can kind of see those proteins. All right, thanks for your help, Kobe. Drop it. All right, here you go. I'll get water here. All right, so proteins are embedded in the lipid bilayer. There's a bell. They give it unique properties. A channel protein is a good example, and they form a passageway for larger charged particles to pass through the cell membrane. Okay. All right. Next one is gap junctions. I'm going to move my tray again. I'm going to bring back my surface so that I can put a little bit of fluid on here. Okay, and I'm going to put a little bit more fluid on my surface. I'm going to get my straw ready. This time, I'm going to blow my bubble on here, representing the cell and the cell membrane. But then I'm going to take my mouth off the straw, and I'm going to leave the straw inside the bubble. Let's see what happens. Taking my mouth off. You guys can see we've got air leaving. Again. Air leaving. So air is flowing through this straw out. Well, this hole represents something called a gap junction, okay? Gap junctions form between neighboring cells. So I could have another cell maybe right next to it here. Okay, and if we had a straw that was running between these two, these gap junctions allow the cytoplasm to connect directly. And it provides a quick way to move materials from, let's say, this cell to this cell. It can flow right through those gap junctions, just like we saw air flowing out of the straw when I left it inside the cell. Those are some gap junctions between these two cells. Okay, so gap junctions provide a quick way to move materials between cells. And then our very last one is how some cells reproduce. Let me make the bubble a little bit bigger here. All right, so there's our single cell, all right? Some cells reproduce through a process called binary fission. Binary fission is mostly in bacteria, okay? And they reproduce by the cell basically splitting itself in two, and it does that with the help of the cell membrane. So you had that long piece of thread you still had left over, okay? We're gonna wanna dip that thread into our bubble solution, okay, so it's wet, all right? And then we're going to bring it out and we're going to model how a cell might go through binary fission. I'm putting it down flat on the table. I'm bringing it in underneath. And as I pull up slowly, I can see a cell membrane forming. And I have divided my cell in two. I'm going to do this again here. If you go slow, it's hard to see at this angle. But from when I'm looking this way, I can actually see the cell membrane forming and being built as I move it up. This is very similar to how bacteria reproduce, and with their ability to reproduce so quickly, and how we cannot be sick in the morning, and then by the evening time, we're infected. We got lots of issues with lots of bacteria happening to us. So some single-celled bacteria reproduce by splitting in two, okay? Similar to how this worked. Now you are primarily not made up of bacteria cells. You're made up of eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells do not go through this process. They use a process called mitosis primarily to reproduce themselves. But it's still an excellent feature to show one of the processes of the cell membrane. So hopefully this helps you guys. Even if you watch this, I would try some of these at home. It's kind of fun, especially the protein snapping string. That's really, I always get some hoots in class when we do it in class. And that's the Bubble Lab. So you could watch this. Don't forget on your lab sheet to fill out the concepts, and then at the end write a paragraph summary of the structure and function of the cell membrane.